So let's talk about the next encounter. And this is one with a clergyman. I love this story. Here you have
I
the
know
narrator.
people like this. They're not even clergymen necessarily, but
What was that?
I know a lot of people like this. They're not even necessarily clergymen, but
Right.
I've been like this myself, so not pointing fingers.
Yeah. So we have the narrator discussing religion with somebody who he had known in mortality. And this was a clergyman. And the clergyman, and they're talking about how they approached faith. And the way they approached faith was, it was an abstract concept. It was an academic exercise, right? They didn't actually come to know God. They studied about God. So think of this as like, kind of a stereotype of divinity school. I'm going to go study about God, and I'll have this theoretical construct that I build about God, but I'll never actually pursue God in reality. So the clergyman says, my opinions were not only honest, but heroic. I asserted them fearlessly. When the doctrine of the resurrection ceased to commend itself to the critical faculties which God had given me, I openly rejected it. I preached my famous sermon. I defied the whole chapter. I took every risk. And the narrator is like, hold on a minute there, friend. He says, when in our whole lives did we honestly face in solitude the one question on which all turned, whether after all the supernatural might not in fact occur? When did we put up one moment's real resistance to the loss of our faith?
And we should say his missionary here that's talking to him is a fellow intellectual clergy, but who's repented.
Right. Yeah. Right. So he's repented, and what we're seeing here, though, is that the clergyman is only capable of abstract thinking about God, and he can't even recognize the reality that the place that he has been back in that gray town was in fact hell.
Yeah.
He pushes back on that. He's like, well, it's getting better.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hold some of my intellectual salons and we'll make it better.
Yeah.
It's just, I love this section too, because you see, it's not just clergymen, it's all of us. I mean, when I read this, it stings sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's the intellectualizing of faith. And I think, as Jeff was talking about, the reality, and the ghosts, like, this guy is definitely a ghost. He can't even see the reality of where he is and what's happening, because he's so abstract. I mean, and you guys, I'm sure you see this a lot with YouTube lectures and public intellectuals and podcasts, where it's like they get so esoteric and like different layers on layers, and you're like, wait, what about Jesus? Can we get back to Jesus?
Yes.
You can just get so in your own thinking, and he later will come to the artist that has kind of a similar problem, where you get so into your art that you forgot, I was actually doing this because I was trying to portray beauty and truth. But now I've gotten in the weeds of my own intellect or my own artistic ability. And so I think it's so important to be grounded when we're talking about God and when we're trying to learn about God and actually wanting the answers, because that's what he says. It's like you just want to question and have these insights, but you don't actually want to reach the destination. That's not what he wants. He wants the progress. So it's a pride thing again. Like, look how smart I am, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And your point about him honestly being unable to conceive of some concepts. He's so wrapped up in his own thinking, he cannot perceive heaven. These places he's in, he can't even see stuff. This ghost missionary is, I'll call him that even though Lewis doesn't, but this ghost missionary just has so hard of a time getting through this incredibly intelligent person's mind.
Right. Right. And he says, okay, we talked about heaven and hell back in mortality. Do you know where you have been? Because that literally was hell. And no, this man, he's so enamored with the intellectual exercise of thinking about abstract ideas about God that he can't engage with reality. You can't get through to somebody like that.
And C.S. Lewis was surrounded by these guys at Oxford.
At
Oxford.
Like
you just know. And that, like he said, like he relates to this. He is the narrator in this. It is Lewis, right? So he's watching all this. And it is an easy trap to fall into. It really is. And I think we have to have our eyes open to what is it we're actually doing this for? Are we doing it for ourselves, or are we doing it so we can know reality, know truth, and know God, and be his servant, And so really, he just can't get that through to him. His spirit guide is just really trying in all the ways he can to get him to see reality, but he's too abstract now. He can't do it.
Now, and there's a lesson here, and we read in the New Testament that at one point Jesus kind of openly said a prayer to the Father, and he said, "I thank thee, Father, that you revealed this to babies, to simple people." Right, and not the learned and kind of the elites in society, right? If you're somebody who's not super intellectually gifted, you might sometimes feel like, oh, I'm missing out because I can't engage in these really sophisticated, elaborate discussions about theology or whatever. No. You're not missing out.
Yeah.
Part of the message here is, if you are prone to overthinking, you just can't abide reality. Yeah. So some of the most powerful realities of the gospel are revealed to simple people who are not prone to overthinking and abstraction, right?
Yeah.
I think of Isaiah, one of your favorites, Dan, where it says, you have a dream and you eat and you drink and you wake up thirsty. Yeah. That's hell. And that's this clergyman.
Yeah.
And a lot of us sometimes. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, because when I was reading this as a Latter-day Saint, there's one section where he says, "I will bring you to the land not of questions, but of answers, and you shall see the face of God." And then he talks about how, in heaven, you're not having to seek anymore, and it's a place where everything is filled rather than seeking. But as we, from our understanding of eternal progression, and that there is, how do you guys kind of hear what I'm getting at here, where heaven is a place for getting all the answers and you don't need to seek anymore. But also we do believe in eternal progression, and that there is a form, a continual upward movement. Do you see any kind of contradiction there, or what do you guys think?
My frame of mind after reading this book, in terms of how I think about heaven, is that it is a set of it is reality and how we respond to it. That's what heaven is. And when we talk about eternal progression, what does that mean? Well, it means more increasing exposure to more of reality and more development of our capacity to engage well with reality for eternity.
Mm. And what how I think of it, Allie, too, is, it's a good question you ask, and I've thought about it in the context of this book and elsewhere. I see it as eternal progression without a fallen world. So in the fallen world, we have opposition, and we learn through opposition. And at least in my concept, and I might be falling in clergyman territory here, but is that after this life, after the resurrection, when we go to our final glory, there's still progress. In the imagery of this book, or how does it put in the last battle? Further up and further in. So there's always further up and further in, but it's not going to have this fallen, where, again, in my thoughts, the law of adversity and opposition is repealed, but the law of progression is not.
Yeah. No, I like that. And Lewis in here says, he's saying you used to ask questions so you could get answers.
Yeah.
You know, you used to actually want the answer. So yeah, I like
and they'll still be learning then. And so we'll have our Urim and Thummim and our crystal earth that we can get answers, but it looks like we can still have questions, right?
Yeah. I think maybe in my finite mind, I don't realize how many answers there are to get, you know? And so I'm like, well, would I be bored? You know, just, but yeah, we can't conceptualize, you know, what it would be like, I think, too.
We can't, and that's going to be one of the themes that emerges later on in the book is George MacDonald, and I'm kind of getting ahead here, but he's going to make some very clear points about how we operate within time.
Yeah.
And when you're asking when you're asking questions about the eternities from within time, you can actually get yourself into trouble because you won't be able to comprehend what the answers are.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the next encounter, and that is with the apple stealer. Yes.
Should we have Allie read it?
Sure,
are you able to see it there, Allie?
Yeah. The amazing thing was that he succeeded. Okay, so this is a man who he on the bus, he was talking about how he wants to start a business in hell, trying to get commodities that they don't have. So he goes with the intention of bringing back a lot of stuff, but he's not really succeeding because he's not capable. But so this is what happens when he tries. He's trying to take an apple. The amazing thing was that he succeeded. When I remembered what the leaf had felt like when I tried to lift it, I could hardly help admiring this unhappy creature when I saw him rise, staggering to his feet, actually holding the smallest of the apples in his hand. He was lame from his hurts, and the weight bent him double. Yet even so, inch by inch, still availing himself of every scrap of cover, he set out on his Via Dolorosa to the bus, carrying his torture. "Fool, put it down," said the great voice suddenly. It was quite unlike any other voice I had heard so far. It was a thunderous yet liquid voice. With an appalling certainty, I knew that the waterfall itself was speaking, and I saw now, though it did not cease to look like a waterfall, that it was also a bright angel. "Fool," he said, "put that down. You cannot take it back. There's no room for it in hell. Stay here and learn to eat such apples. The very leaves and blades of grass in the wood will delight to teach you."
Wow. What happened here?
Well, he was stuck in, I guess, in Dante's Purgatory, it would be avarice. It would be the material world. He wants more and greed and get an advantage. And he hadn't quite gotten to the point where he saw the futility of such things.
Right. He wasn't able to get past or think beyond his immediate cravings for security. Just kind of in squirrel mode. I have to gather acorns, you know, no matter what is going on, no matter how many I've already gathered, like I cannot get out of that mindset, right? So he actually succeeds in picking up an apple, and it says it was this agonizing thing for him to do. And he didn't take a hint in all that pain. There wasn't a moment of self-reflection like, hey, why is this so painful? What's going on here? Like, is this a productive use of my time? Is this the best use of my energy? There was no self-reflection whatsoever.
And that's what the lack of introspection that these people have is truly staggering. And it makes you wonder how many things we are not seeing that we're doing.
Right.
And contrast the scarcity mindset of hell where there's not enough.
Yeah.
And we put some scriptures down here, which we won't read here, but anybody can look them up. But there's enough and to share, and the earth is full, and God has given his abundance to us. And, you know, you talked about avarice or gluttony is maybe another one that this could be. And I thought of a scene from Paralandra. which is the second book in the space trilogy that Allie was talking about earlier. That's a similar thing. I'm going to read it really quick. So Pearlandra, just real quick, is pre-fall Garden of Eden. And Ransom, the narrator, gets to visit there. And there's some fruit there that he gets to taste. And it's described this way. It was, of course, a taste, but just this, his thirst and hunger had been thirst and hunger. But then it was so different from every other taste that it seemed mere pedantry to call it a taste at all. It was like the discovery of a totally new genus of pleasures, something unheard of among men, out of all reckoning, beyond all covenant. For one drink of this on earth, wars would be fought and nations betrayed. It could not be classified. He could never tell us when he came back to the world of men, whether it was sharp or sweet, savory or voluptuous, creamy or piercing. Not like that was all he could ever say to such inquiries. And as he let the empty gourd fall from his hand, so he eats this fruit, and then he lets it fall, and was about to pluck a second one, it came to his head that he was now neither hungry nor thirsty. And yet to repeat a pleasure so intense and almost so spiritual seemed an obvious thing to do. His reason, or what we commonly take to be reason in our old world, was all in favor of tasting this miracle again. The childlike innocence of fruit, the labors he had undergone, the uncertainty of the future, all seemed to recommend this action. Yet something seemed opposed to his reason. It is difficult to suppose that his opposition came from desire, for what desire would turn from so much deliciousness? But for whatever cause, it appeared to him better not to taste again. Perhaps the experience had been so complete that repetition of it would be like a vulgarity, like asking to hear the same symphony twice a day. As he stood pondering over this and wondering how often in his life he had reiterated pleasures, not through desire, but in the teeth of desire and in obedience to a spurious rationalism. So I love that image in there of abundance where we have this fullness. And yes, there's abundance of fruit and you can have more, but you maybe don't need it.
That's great. I like that. Just the hopeful, the joyous message. This is something I think we've really, when we're teaching our youth about the gospel, I think sometimes we miss this promise of that we're not going to be missing anything. Like, it's going to be so incredible. And he goes on in future encounters and just is like trying to really, and this is one of the reasons I love C.S. Lewis so much, is because he shows the joy that can be found through God and that it is completely unlike and way beyond any of these, petty, shallow things. I like that the waterfall spirit calls him a fool twice. I mean, it's just like, we're so shallow, we don't understand. And I like that quote you shared, Jeff. It's just like, we just want more and we don't even really know why.
Right. Well, very good. Let's move on to the next story. And this is the Cynic. And so here, Jeff, do you want to read this one?
Sure. I won't take it personally. You picked me, even though I'm guilty. I'm guilty as charged. So I guess I've seen about all there is to see. Then the missionary says, "You don't think of staying?" The ghost, "That's all propaganda. Of course, there never was any question of our staying. You can't eat the fruit and you can't drink the water, and it takes you all your time to walk on the grass. A human being couldn't live here. All that idea of staying is only an advertisement stunt." "Well, I'll be getting along," says the ghost after a short silence. "You coming my way?" "There doesn't seem to be much point in going anywhere on your showing," I replied. A great depression had come over me. "And at least it's not raining here." "Not at the moment," said the hard-bitten ghost. "But I never saw any one of these bright mornings that didn't turn to rain later on. And by gum, when it does rain here, hadn't you thought of that? It hadn't occurred to you that with the sort of water they have here, every raindrop will make a hole in you like a machine gun bullet? That's their little joke, you see. First of all, tantalize you with ground you can't walk on and water you can't drink, and then drill you full of holes. But they won't catch me that way.
Right. So this is cynicism. And it's interesting that the narrator refers to him as the hard-bitten ghost. So this is probably somebody who experienced some kind of betrayal or disappointment in life and never got over it.
Yeah.
Was never able to move through that and learn to trust again.
In the last battle, again, there's a scene where the dwarves are tricked. They're tricked by a false Christ, which ends up being a donkey or a puzzle, the donkey in a fleece, and they end up being in this wonderful banquet. But to them, because they're so convinced they don't want to get tricked again, they say the dwarves are for the dwarves. So they turn to partisanship and they turn to hard-bitten cynicism, and they can't see what's in front of them. They can't see the banquet that's in front of them. They can't see the light. All they see is darkness. They still think they're in darkness. Yeah. And that's what happens if we get so stuck in our cynicism when we get betrayed. And we're so afraid of that happening to us again.
Yep. He's trying to avoid getting hurt or disappointed again. So he gravitates toward the most negative possible interpretation of everything. That way I can protect myself and I'll never be disappointed again. That is what cynicism is.
Yeah, it's a nihilistic view of the world. And I mean, all these guys speak to me. That just tells you how messed up I am. But C.S. Lewis, you can tell by the end, he's really shaken by this guy. And that he might, this might be kind of his issue.
Yeah, this one hits him hard.
Yeah, it hits him hard. And I think, on the other side of this joy and this hope, there is the darkness, and there is, what if all of it's a lie? What if I just made all of this up in my mind? And this is going through his mind, and he's trying, he hasn't decided to go back, but he's, one of C.S. Lewis's, his two most influential kind of, mentors spiritually would have been George MacDonald and G.K. Chesterton, according to his writings. And Chesterton talked about cynicism a lot. I want to share a quote by Chesterton that just came to me as I was reading this from Orthodoxy. He says, of cynicism, it says, as an explanation of the world, it has a sort of insane simplicity. It has just the quality of the madman's argument. We have at once the sense of covering everything and the sense of it leaving everything out. He understands everything, and everything does not seem worth an understanding. So this is the idea that you can poke holes. It's very rational, the cynicism of this man. Yeah, I mean, of course, can't you see, and so when you went for someone with a rational mind like Lewis, it does start to make sense. But as Chesterton shows here, it's not what it says, it's what it leaves out. It's the hope and the promise of joy. And so luckily, his savior comes and rescues him from it soon, and George MacDonald, his guide. But yeah, this one, I mean, you get a little depressed yourself when you read this chapter, because you're like, man.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So now let's move on to the self-conscious soul, the self-conscious ghost. And I'll read this one. A moment later, I heard the sound of feet, and one of the bright people came in sight. So one of the bright people, that's a spirit or an angel, one of these missionary type of souls. One always noticed that sound there, for we ghosts made no noise when we walked.
Again,
go away, squealed the goat. What was that?
Sorry, insubstantial again. Yeah.
Right. Go away, squealed the ghost. Go away. Can't you see that I want to be alone? But you need help, said the solid one. If you have the least trace of decent feeling left, said the ghost, you'll keep away. I don't want help. I want to be left alone. Do go away. They'll see me. What does it matter if they do? I'd rather die. But you've died already. There's no good trying to go back to that. The ghost made a sound, something between a sob and a snarl. I wish I'd never been born, it said. What are we born for? For infinite happiness, said the spirit. You can step out into it at any moment. But I tell you, they'll see me. So this ghost is just terrified of the possibility of being vulnerable. And
this is shame. This person is stuck in shame, and shame separates us.
Yes, absolutely. So they can't abide the presence of others. If you're consumed in shame, you become terrified of being vulnerable in any way with other people. Right?
It kind of reminded me of right after Adam and Eve ate the fruit. And they're like, wait, we got to cover our nakedness. Well, Satan reminds them of that. He helps them get that shame. Mm-hmm. And then, God's like, who told you were naked? And she's in that self-conscious state.
And contrast it to Doctrine and Covenants 76. My favorite description of the celestial kingdom is they shall see as they are seen and know as they are known.
Yeah.
And to be seen and known, we have, Dan and I love this quote that talks about to be seen and known is what we yearn for and loved, but to be seen and unloved is terrifying. And so this shame, this person in shame is so closed off in their shame, they can't experience love. And so that they're incapable in this state anyway of being in heaven, because heaven will require us to not only see truly, but be seen.
Yes. Wow. So for a lot of souls, that's going to require development of courage and just kind of that open heart and trust and all of these things that we sometimes avoid. Now, let's talk about George MacDonald.
Woohoo!
So I'm going to read this, and then Allie, you're going to tell us about George MacDonald. Okay. Where are you going? Said a voice with a strong Scotch accent.
You have to do it in the Scottish accent, Dan.
Where are you going? Said a voice with a strong Scotch accent. I stopped and looked. On one of the rocks sat a very tall man, almost a giant, with a flowing beard. I had not yet looked one of the solid people in the face. Now, when I did so, I discovered that one sees them with a kind of double vision. Here was an enthroned and shining God, whose ageless spirit weighed upon mine like a burden of solid gold. And yet, at the very same moment, here was an old, weather-beaten man, one who might have been a shepherd. I don't quite know, said I. Ye can sit and talk to me then, he said, making room for me on the stone. I don't know you, sir, said I, taking my seat beside him. My name is George, he answered. George MacDonald. Okay, so tell us about George MacDonald, Allie.
I just have to say, C.S. Lewis would have been really, really excited to meet George MacDonald because he adored this man. He calls him his master. I want to just read a quote. I regard him as my master. I know of hardly any other writer who seems closer to the spirit of Christ than George MacDonald. So really, really respected him. And he's someone I've really come to love and respect as well. Just the only way to really say anything about it is just encourage you to read his writing, because it's true, like the spirit of Christ, just this Christ-like way of, and deep, very deep, but not in an intellectualizing way. But it's interesting because in Dante's Inferno, we see that Dante's kind of hero is Virgil, and that he is the guide that takes him through Inferno and Purgatorio. But C.S. Lewis gets to pick his own, and this is who he picked. So, and I think it was well picked because he's going to go through a lot of theology with MacDonald. And interestingly, he I don't know if he thinks MacDonald has changed some of his views now that he's in heaven, but not all of it is totally what MacDonald would have said. But nonetheless, I mean, it's by and large, they're very. I actually wrote a piece. If anyone's interested, maybe we could put in the show notes of just how they did differ theologically, because I think it's kind of interesting. But 99% they agreed with. So
yeah.
Well, what about this idea, guys, of him describing MacDonald as an enthroned and shining God? Now, Lewis's mainstream Christian defenders will say Lewis didn't believe in apotheosis, or the fact that man could become God. That's blasphemy, according to many of them. But this is far from the only time, and we'll get accused, Latter-day Saints, of appropriating Lewis and twisting Lewis to make it sound like he's in favor of apotheosis, which is a very Latter-day Saint idea. But this is hardly the only quote. I'm going to give you another one, and then you can tell me why I've misinterpreted him. This is from The Weight of Glory. It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest, most uninteresting person you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, can I counter that with the quote that's similar?
Yes.
But it's not actually countering it, actually probably confirming it. But every Christian is to become a little Christ. The whole purpose of a Christian is simply nothing else. I think this is his thinking. I'm not sure. See, in terms of our vision of becoming gods and having our own, progression in that way, I'm not sure that that's the way he was thinking about it as much as we will become like God, we will. And so he's not thinking as maybe practically or in that mode, but definitely that we are capable of becoming little Christs. That's what we're trying to do. And that is what George MacDonald became, So I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what was in his mind when he writes these things, but
yeah.
Right. Now let's talk about how George MacDonald helps the narrator to understand what's going on. And I'll go ahead and read this one too. Here we're introduced to a complaining soul, and let's see what they conclude as a result of this. At this moment, we were suddenly interrupted by the thin voice of a ghost talking at an enormous speed. Looking behind us, we saw the creature. It was addressing one of the solid people and was doing so too busily to notice us. Every now and then, the solid spirit tried to get in a word, but without success. The ghost's talk was like this. "Oh, my dear, I've had such a dreadful time. I don't know how I ever got here at all. I was coming with Eleanor Stone, and we'd arranged the whole thing, and we were to meet at the corner of Sink Street. I made it perfectly plain because I knew what she was like, and if I told her once, I told her 100 times I would not meet her outside that dreadful Marjorie Banks woman's house, not after the way she treated me. That was one of the most dreadful things that happened to me. I've been dying to tell you because..." So you have this soul, this ghost who is just rambling and ranting with one complaint after another, rapid fire. Okay. And George MacDonald, I'm going to have one of you read what George MacDonald says, because I get emotional reading George MacDonald in this book. So, Allie, how about if you read what George MacDonald says?
Sure. The whole difficulty of understanding hell is that the thing to be understood is so nearly nothing. But ye have had experiences. It begins with the grumbling mood, and yourself still distinct from it, perhaps criticizing it. And yourself in a dark hour may will that mood, embrace it. You can repent and come out of it again, but there may come a day when you can do that no longer. Then there will be no you left to criticize the mood, not even to enjoy it, but just the grumble itself, going on forever like a machine. But come, you're here to watch and listen. Lean on my arm, and we'll go for a little walk.
Wow. What is being said here?
Yeah,
she's lost her humanity, right? Or he, I don't remember.
Yeah,
it's a
woman.
she.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it, Jeff. It's, you're
robot.
no longer looking at relationships at all. You're just looking at yourself. And yeah,
Right.
I've been in those moods, and this usually comes in my mind. Am I becoming the grumble? Am I becoming a grumble?
Well, but that's interesting though, because George MacDonald is saying you might dabble in these things from time to time. You might indulge a grumble here and there. But if you feed that and you keep indulging it, there will come a point where the amount of you and grumble, that ratio climbs to where you are grumble. Okay.
Yeah.
That has become such a dominant part of your soul that it has squeezed out this being of light that used to be there, right? So you now have become the grumble.
It's the difference between being the grumpy old man who no matter what is going to be mad at the kids out in the front yard and having a bad day,
Right.
And I don't want to defame someone, but C.S. Lewis lived with a woman for, was it 20 or 30 years? Her name was Mrs. Moore. And, he was pretty loyal to her, but we hear from varying sources that maybe there might be a little of her in this. He promised his best friend in World War I that he would take care of his mother if he died, and he did. And so he did take care and lived with her. And in some of Lewis's writings, you see this kind of character of a woman, and part of me just wonders if maybe he experienced a grumbling woman, and maybe didn't see a lot of capacity for change. But again, I could be very wrong on that.
And this for a little more hopeful spin on this, because this does hit you in the gut. Here's C.S. Lewis's heroine in Till We Have Faces, which is maybe my favorite Lewis fiction. Maybe we'll do another one on that one. Mm-hmm. But here she's at the end and she says this: when the time comes to you, at which you will be forced at last to utter the speech which is lain at the center of your soul for years, which you have all that time, idiot-like, been saying over and over, you'll not talk about the joy of words. I saw well why the gods do not speak to us openly, nor let us answer, till that word can be dug out of us. Why should they hear the babble that we think we mean? How can they meet us face to face till we have faces? If this woman would only stay in heaven, she could get some solidity, she could get some face, she could get some substantialness. And these words that she's repeating, idiot-like, would come to a truth. And in the Till We Have Faces, the narrator is writing this book as a screed, as a complaint against the gods. And when she finally it's set in Greek mythology, so there are gods instead of a god. But as she finally gets to read her complaint, it's totally rewritten to be the true one. And that's what could happen to this woman too, if she would only stay.
Yep. Okay, let's move along to the painting artist. All right.
By
Jeff,
the way, these numbers, everybody, are chapter numbers.
Yes, these are chapter numbers for the book.
Yeah. So you want to look these up in the book, just look at the chapters we have here. Right. When you painted the earth, at least in your earlier days, it was because you caught glimpses of heaven in the earthly landscape. This is the missionary talking to our artist. The success of your painting was that it enabled others to see the glimpses too. But here you were having the thing itself. It's from here that the messages came. There is no good telling us about this country, for we see it already. In fact, we see it better than you do. The ghost replies, of course, you haven't seen my later works. One becomes more and more interested in paint for its own sake. The missionary replies, one does indeed. I have also had to recover from that. It was all a snare. Ink and catgut and paint were necessary down there, but they are also dangerous stimulants. Every poet and musician and artist An artist, but for grace, is drawn away from love of the thing he tells to love of the telling, till down in deep hell, they cannot be interested in God at all, but only in what they say about him. For it doesn't stop at being interested in paint, They sink lower, become interested in their own personalities, and then in nothing but their own reputations.
That is powerful.
Yeah.
Every poet and musician and artist, but for grace, is drawn away from love of the thing he tells to love of the telling.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is the danger of becoming a podcaster.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. Well, any creator, I think, is in danger because we're at rivals with God, who's the ultimate creator. And we can get to think maybe we could do it better, or maybe we should do it differently. So there's some envy that makes them want to take us as creators, makes us want to take God's place. And it can set us in opposition to him.
Yeah, I had an experience a few months ago where I was just there are so many wonderful podcasts out there, like Come Follow Me podcasts or YouTube channels, and I was just loving them. And then I just had this crash, and I was like, what is happening? Like, I was getting annoyed by all of them, and I was hating it all. I don't know, like, I just had this. And then I was like, you know what, like, let me actually read the scriptures for a while, not listen to the podcast about the scriptures, but read the scriptures. And it really, I was trying to get through Dante's Inferno a year ago and the Divine Comedy. And I listened to probably 200 hours of podcasts trying to explain the thing because it's hard. And then I just opened it up and I was like, whoa, this is amazing, and I guess I'm just trying to relate that to this and say, I really hope when people watch this, they say, I'm going to read the actual book.
Right.
That's the goal of this podcast or YouTube, I think, and the goal is to go from there to the source, because I do feel like C.S. Lewis does a better job than I could ever do. And so, point to him, but he is pointing back to the source. And so if we always keep that in mind, and I think that these days of endless, podcasts and things where it's like it's Wednesday, I have to create content or whatever, it can be a little dangerous to get in that loop where, wait, why are we doing this? We actually, the goal is to come to Christ and to become, to focus on him. So for me, I've had to be really introspective about it and try and check myself, because I do create content and stuff, and just say, you know what, maybe I don't need to do anything. Maybe God's not speaking to me this week. So this spoke to me for sure.
Very good. I love it. Yeah, this story is definitely, it related to the earlier story about the clergyman. This tendency to think, to be so enamored with our own abstract ideas about God and our presentation formats and all of those kinds of things, that we actually miss the real thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the controlling wife. All right. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I want to read just a segment of it. And here we have a ghost who is talking about her husband. All right. And she says, well, that is quite out of the question, said a female ghost to one of the bright women. I should not dream of staying if I'm expected to meet Robert, her husband. I am ready to forgive him, of course, but anything more is quite impossible. How he comes to be here, but that is your affair. But if you have forgiven him, said the other, surely I forgive him as a Christian, said the ghost. But there are some things one can never forget. And so she talks about her life together with this man. And, she has these complaints about he never quite measured up to her expectations. But then she makes a little transition down here and she says, with all the time one would have here, I believe I could still make something of him somewhere quite to ourselves. Wouldn't that be a good plan? He's not fit to be on his own. Put me in charge of him. He wants firm handling. I know him better than you do. What's that? No, give him to me. Do you hear? Don't consult him. Just give him to me. I'm his wife, aren't I? I was only beginning. There's lots of things I still want to do with him. No, listen, Hilda, please, I'm so miserable. I must have someone to do things to. It's simply frightful down there. No one minds about me at all.
She finally gets to the truth of it there at the end, and not exclusive to wives. You'll see husbands like this too, of course.
Absolutely. But yeah. We
and
all
mothers
do this
and fathers.
We form these mental images of our spouses and our children, and some of these images can be so wildly off the mark of who that person really is, right? So and if you're not able to restrain those impulses, you can become just this domineering personality in your relationships. And that's what we're seeing here.
It's doing, and she justifies it because she's doing good. It's the devouring mother, right? It's the idea of it's for their own good. I'm being compassionate. It's self-sacrifice. It's interesting in Screw Tape Letters. There's an interesting section where Lewis talks about how we need to stop making selflessness the virtue, and it should be love, right? Because this idea of doing it all for other people, I'm selfless, I'm giving, but really what we want is love, because that's guided by God. And so rather than fixing her husband so he's a certain way, she loves him, and God guides that.
Right.
Yeah.
So
this form of pride, she's taking the place of God and Christ in fashioning this Robert. And I don't think we meet Robert, do we? So,
No.
But he's probably allowed this. And so this is an example as a marriage and family therapist. You'll see sometimes couples that are stable, but profoundly unhealthy, right? So they both were maybe in this synergistic or parasitic relationship that went on. But, I guess Robert gets out of it because he's here, because she knows he's here. But that you'll see these cycles that people get in, and that firm hand that some people think they need to give. But we're taking the place of God.
Is it easier for the controlled to escape this dynamic, or the controlling? Which is harder to get out of?
I don't know. But if I had to guess, I'd say the controlled can probably escape it easier. Yeah.
Okay. Well, on a related note, our next encounter is the possessive mother. Okay. Who would like to read this one?
Okay, I'll do it.
Okay.
But Pam, don't you see? Okay, well, maybe I'll preface it. This is a woman whose son died. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Her son died while they were on Earth, and she really had.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, she wants him back, doesn't she?
Right. She went through grief, and she's like, okay, now it's my turn to get my son back. But she overdid it on the grief and on all of that. So, but Pam, don't you see you are not beginning at all as long as you're in that state of mind? You're treating God only as a means to Michael, but the whole thickening treatment consists in learning to want God for his own sake. You wouldn't talk like that if you were a mother. You mean if I were only a mother. But there is no such thing as being only a mother. You exist as Michael's mother only because you first exist as God's creature. That relation is older and closer. No, listen, Pam. He also loves. He also has suffered. He also has waited a long time. If he loved me, this is her. If he loved me, he'd let me see my boy. If he loved me, why did he take Michael away from me? I wasn't going to say anything about that, but it's pretty hard to forgive, but he had to take Michael away, partly for Michael's sake. I'm sure I did my best to make Michael happy. I gave up my whole life, and it's no business of yours. I hate your religion, and I hate and despise your God. I believe in a God of love.
Whoa. That last statement.
Yeah.
I
She's
believe
in
in a God of,
idolatry, isn't she? She doesn't want the true and living God. Yeah.
right. I believe in a God of love. Look how I love.
Yeah.
I'm domineering and possessive and controlling and needy and all of these things. And I call that love.
What is it C.S. Lewis says? You can tell this kind of loving mother. You can tell by the hunted expression on the loved ones' faces.
Right.
Yeah. Look at, this is where we talk past each other so often when we talk about love, which I agree is better than selflessness, but correctly defined, correctly conceived, and correctly realized in our praxis, in our action. Mm-hmm. So many definitions of love are bounded or finite, idolatrous, selfish, and therefore will take us straight to hell.
Yep. Definitely.
Hopefully with a stop in purgatory.
Hopefully, yes.
Right.
Well, it's interesting when Christ, I remember as a kid, I was shocked by the scripture where it says, leave your father and mother,
and whosoever loveth father and mother more than me.
Yeah, that's
is not worthy of me.
And I was like, wait, what? Really? And no, I mean, he means it. We're actually not supposed to love anyone as much as God. And she has that totally swapped. And yeah, like they say, she's not actually really loving Michael in the proper sense.
No, it's codependency. It's this kind of craving, neediness, and all of those things. But because she feels them strongly, they must be love, right? Yeah. This is how I love.
And there's no doubt she feels it strongly. She's willing to suffer quite a bit for her vision of love.
Right.
I love how it's called thickening treatment too. This thickening treatment of being able to abide heaven.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's okay that it's a process. Yeah.
Yes.